time. Um, like especially like a drummer that's just always at 10 when the song needs to go down to a 3 before it goes to the chorus or something, and it's just like, oh my god, this isn't working. The same thing happens in the studio where you need dynamics. Different instruments become lead instruments at different times, so the volumes have to compensate to match for that. And I think a lot of this conversation is probably going to be about volumes, because that's like the first thing that comes to mind when we say automation, volume automation. Going back to, mixing on a console, people just grabbing the faders and moving them as things happen. But in the modern world, we also are going to be talking about automating the frequency balance, in the stereo field, and down to things like little effects, like how they change over a word or a part. It could totally make the song come to life.
Totally, yeah. Um, oh, wait a second.
Cool.
Okay, so I need to say that real quick, Thomas. You need to edit that out of the episode, please. If you're watching live, sorry for that. We are streaming live, or we are experimenting with that. And I just think I'm accidentally live on my personal page on Facebook instead of our group. No, I'm in the group. Sorry for
All
that. I
right.
just needed to make sure. I just thought for a second I'm like live on my personal profile, which would have been okay. I just wanted to
Yeah,
know.
you're fine.
All right. Um, back to the topic. Yeah, totally. I agree. And
Oh,
so
sorry. Now I'm screwing this up. I pulled up our live stream because I was curious, and it started playing. Okay, for our live audience, I've already interrupted us, so I'm just going to keep going here. Am I able to share this as well? I'm trying to find a share button. I want to like share it so people can discover the live stream.
I don't know if you can. Um, let's see.
Oh yeah,
Just
I can
try
do it.
it.
I got just the link. That's all I need to do.
Okay, whatever. Just do it. I can't handle it. Like, to me, I'm the worst person when it comes to multitasking. I can only do one thing, and like having to monitor the YouTube stream, the Facebook stream, and our actual conversation and our notes is like totally impossible for me. So I would be very surprised if this whole thing worked in the end. Like when I would watch the YouTube stream and everything, like the finished video, I would be very surprised if that worked. But we'll see. All right, good. Let's continue with the actual episode.
Yeah, I am
Um,
out of Facebook.
yeah. So, yeah, totally agree with everything. And I'd say automation for me starts before the static mix, sort of, and then I do a bunch of it after I do my static mix. What I mean by that is like I do a little bit of it before my actual chains. So when I do my initial balance, my rough mix, I will do my rough mix, but I will also make sure that I will clip gain and maybe use volume automation, like automating the little gain knob that Cubase has at the beginning of every channel, or
Mhm.
automating a gain plugin before everything else in my chain, so that my static mix just makes sense, like my rough mix makes sense, because
Right.
sometimes things come in with weird levels, or you record very quiet parts and very loud parts, and the static mix just doesn't work at all. And I want to make sure I can have a fader balance that just works so I can listen through the whole song. And I need less compression to even out things and stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do usually is automate levels or use clip gain to even things out. And then maybe automate pan in case something needs to move from left to center and back to left or something like that. I don't know. Sometimes that happens. Just to make sure that when I set my faders to 0 and I hit play and I have my initial rough mix, that makes sense. That's the first thing for me. It's not about feeling vibe or enhancing anything. It's just about getting a rough mix that works.
Right. It's a logical solution to an overly dynamic recording, for example. Uh, yeah, now I think we should just quickly clarify that clip gain is actually adjusting the gain of specific parts of the waveform. So it comes before any plugins that are going to be in the chain. It's like pre-automation, pre-volume, pre-fader automation. I guess.
Yeah. And I don't know if about other DAWs, it might not be called clip gain in the DAW you're using. So
Mm.
what we basically mean is you can cut the audio event or the clip, or like even this is called different in different DAWs, like the square block thing where you see the waveform in, like on your actual audio track, that thing. You can cut that, and then you can grab. Usually, with most DAWs, you can grab the waveform with that block and just move it up or down, and like increase or decrease the level, the volume of this clip without moving the fader. That's what we mean by clip gain. And again, this could be totally different in your DAW, but that's what we're talking about here. If you can't do that, then you would have to automate a gain plugin or a gain knob or anything like not the fader, but anything in the beginning of the chain.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I guess maybe let's give some examples of stuff that would need to be adjusted with clip gain.
Okay. Um, okay. For example, let's see. Definitely vocals,
Yeah.
almost all the time for me. So sometimes a singer will sing quietly, but and be very close to the mic, and it will be a very deep and full and loud sounding vocal, although it's actually pretty quiet. And then they will yell or scream or belt or like be just louder and like go away from the mic, and it should sound more powerful and louder, but it can actually sound more quiet, or like
Yeah.
it's this weird thing where I would turn down the quiet part and turn up the loud part, for example. That's a classic. Or sometimes just certain words are a little hard to hear, or it's the way people sing or move in front of the mic. Sometimes you just have to take a word or a part of the sentence and make it louder or quieter. At this point, it's such a I don't know. It comes with experience, I guess. But at this point, I listen to the song, look at the waveform, and I know what I have to grab and turn up and down. It's almost a visual thing, and
Mhm.
I have a feeling for what I need to do. I mean, I'm very, very quick with this. Like it's the first or second pass, and then I quickly do all those moves, and then it will just work.
Totally. Yeah. Another example with vocals, I think in particular, is that often they're recorded at different times. So the vocals that were recorded on day one, maybe they did lead vocals, and then you can tell that their doubles were recorded on a different day because the volume is just like totally different. Like they've changed the gain setup or something. So I might compensate for those and get things closer. Or sometimes you'll find that like they've done a dub that is like so there's a part of one track that's just way quieter. They just recorded the verse again or something, but it was probably done on a different day or done they changed the knob for some reason. So even that out, especially on harmonies, I find the harmonies, the different parts of the song are dramatically different volumes. So I'll try and level all those out so that anything I throw on that chain, like onto the harmony bus, is going to be fed a more consistent volume.
Totally, yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, yeah, that's basically it. Like anything else where I don't know, do you do similar things with drums or completely
Sometimes,
other
yeah,
elements?
sometimes there'll be like just a weak kick hit or something like that. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to try and bring that up. I think I can pull it off without it being like a big bleed problem. Um,
Oh yeah,
and then like, yeah, you just have to use your ears, make sure it's transparent enough. Um, so yeah, I think I do like if I have like three different keys, so there's like a piano, an organ, and like a synth pad or something. And if they're not all kind of similar, and this is like literally just visual. If they're not all similar like wave sizes, I'll level them out because they're all going to be going to the same bus for my mixing template, and I want them to kind of be approaching it pretty evenly. And then
hmm
I'll have control of the volume from there. Um, and then I also just like things to kind of hit my plugins decently hot. So like if they're way too quiet and I'm gonna have to slam L1 all the way to the bottom to get it to even limit anything, that's a waste of time. So I might as well just turn up the clip gain while I'm doing my initial clip gain balancing.
absolutely. I think it's essential for the sound sometimes because if you have a snare drum or a kick drum and you set the compressor a certain way, not to even things out, but to increase the attack to make it hit harder, then like it just doesn't work if a hit is too
Hmm.
are too quiet. So if you want a consistent sound, you need to make sure that the hits, especially if the drummer was not so consistent, that it hits the compressor with about the same level, because otherwise it will not only be a level difference, but the sound will be totally different because the louder hits will
Absolutely.
get all the smack and like the punch you want, and the quieter hits will almost be not affected by whatever you're doing. So I think it's essential. And then of course gates and stuff like that don't work at all if you don't do it properly. Like everything that has a threshold basically needs this consistent hot level.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a total. And sometimes I also need to do it because like the other way around. Sometimes I want a transition or something like that to be more. Um, yeah, I want to enhance the dynamics that the drummer played, and I want to turn things down even further
Mm,
to increase like a build up or whatever. And I sometimes do that first before the chain. I just think about correcting the performance in a way, like or
right.
um, yeah, making it as dynamic as the drummer intended it to be, but maybe wasn't able to pull off, and then yeah, things like that. And I do that
Totally.
with every track basically. So we're just correcting the performance and making sure that our chains are hit properly. I think.
Yeah. Yeah. In Pro Tools, anyways, when you're adjusting the clip gain, you literally see the waveform change as you make the adjustments. And
Yeah.
it really feels like that. It feels like you're changing the performance more so than just moving a volume fader. Um, Another example of like reductive clip gain would be you could go after sibilance in a vocal and duck that down so that it doesn't get grabbed by the compressor or whatever you want. That's an option for you. You can pretty much remove it entirely if you wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think we should. I think there's so many things that you can do at this stage that will save you processing later, that will save you gating and like or compression and yeah, a lot of the things we do later are just to even things out or to get rid of stuff we don't want, and you can do a lot of that manually with clip gain. There's
Hmm.
this trade-off though, like you can go crazy and you can manually cut out everything and like mute all the stuff you don't want to have, and like and that's tedious. So there
Right.
is this yeah, it's a balance. It makes sense up to a certain point, and after that, I would rather use a plugin. But
Yeah,
um,
it's quicker.
yeah, okay. So there's that. Then let's just give people a couple of examples because automation is so there's so many different ways you can use that and so many different reasons to use it. Uh, the to me, there's technical reasons like the clip gain thing in front of the chain. But there's also more than anything when I think of automation, like fader automation and rides and doing stuff like that. It's more of an artistic thing. It's
Mm.
about um, making an artistic and also kind of an arrangement thing almost because it's partly about making space for certain things or feature certain things, or and it's also about creating excitement and movement and groove and uh, subtle yeah, I don't know, things a static mix just doesn't have. And this is a
Yeah.
very artistic thing. It's almost like I heard, I think Michael Brower was the guy that I heard that I heard say this. He said that other people were playing the drums and the bass and the guitar, and like he was playing the console.
Right.
So it's just like almost playing an instrument. Like he has his hands at the faders and he just makes moves with the music, which is not so easy to do. And a lot of people these days, myself included, we draw automation more than we actually do it in real time.
Yeah.
But there are people who like perfected this art form of like grabbing a fader, hitting play, and then moving it in real time with the song, and it just works.
Yep.
Um, yeah, so yeah,
Yeah, it takes some practice for
totally.
sure. Um, yeah, we should touch on the static mix thing a little bit just to give people a common mindset for how this usually goes. So a common technique for mixing is you find a loudest, like one of the loudest or the loudest part of the song, and you do a rough balance, and that kind of, and then you might even start doing some mixing like EQ or whatever compression stuff, and then you've kind of got like your rough mix built in from the loudest part of the song, and that it could be considered like a static mix. Now, if you jump around, hopefully it sounds decent, but you're going to find that different parts of the song don't sound as good as that one spot where you just spent a bunch of time getting it to sound right. So that's how I kind of work usually. I do my like first static little thing, and then I jump around and start making like these macro adjustments with automation often to make the other parts fit, because it's like, okay, this little static template is nailing it for this part but sucking on the verses. So what has to change to make the verses good? And now I don't want to just change everything because now the part I just mixed would suck. So I can use uh, automation to get things closer that way. That's like not an exact, like, don't do that, but that's kind of like a dumbed down way of approaching how to get to the automation stage.
Yeah, I totally like that. And this is one of the things where the more I think about it, the more I hear you talk about it, the more clearer it becomes, um, yeah, how I actually do it or how we actually do it, because this is something we just do. We don't think about it as much, and once you have to explain it, um, it becomes more of a process that I don't know. And
Yeah.
so that made me think there's actually four automation steps. The first one is the one we talked about with like gain staging, getting the static mix right, like everything before we touch plugins or our faders. The second one is um, this what you just said, like the static mix up from the loudest part and making that work in the other parts as well. This is like also like broad strokes. This is
Yeah.
turning the whole guitar part down or the whole vocal part down or up or whatever, and like
Just in
um
one spot. Like,
just in
here's the
yeah and
verse, down a dB kind of
yeah,
thing.
exactly. So still pretty broad and like from beat one to the last beat of that section, for example. So that's the second part. Then the third part for me is then making tiny like artistic moves like the individual channels, buses, and all that, and we get to that. So riding things throughout a part or enhancing a certain hit or making things groove or pump or whatever, can be anything. And then the fourth thing is broad strokes, again, at least for me, because the last thing I'll automate is maybe I'll when I'm done with the mix, maybe I'll bump up the chorus half a dB, the whole chorus on the mix bus, or maybe
Mm.
I'll go to the downbeats, the first downbeat of every chorus and or of a bridge or the breakdown or whatever, and I just increase the first hit half a dB just to make it hit a little harder. Like these tiny adjustments that are not on a single track or bus, but like on the whole thing when a certain part comes in. So that will be the last and final thing I'll do. Sometimes that's not necessary, but sometimes it just works and it's a very easy move, but it's yeah, it can just work. Sometimes if the chorus just doesn't hit hard enough, half a dB up, and it works.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Um, and then yeah, the last step for me is like automating like the verb decay to last longer and like just like the smallest little stuff that nobody actually hears.
Yeah, yeah, that, yeah, totally. And that's also the most dangerous thing because, okay, there's that. If you are doing this for yourself and you don't have like a lot of pressure and like a lot of projects and people waiting for you, then you, in theory, you can do this forever and tweak stuff. But still, you want to get it done in the end, right? You want to just finish the song, and this can become very, very dangerous because it's never really finished. You will always find something that you could automate and change and make
Yeah.
even cooler. And so you have to finish at some point. You have to call it done. And um, yeah, so there is something to be said about going into all the details and doing that sort of stuff. But you also know when it's just you have to know when it's just enough, even if you
Yeah.
do it just for yourself. I think. But yeah, we'll get to that. Okay, so um, writing each track and bus to make space. That's something I wanted to talk about. Do you do that? Like, do
Oh yeah.
you move things out of the way when a new guitar comes in or an important new element that hasn't been there before, and then you bring it back up when that element is gone, stuff like that, like to help the arrangement?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It depends on the arrangement though, because sometimes the arrangement does it for you, which is awesome. So it's automation is not a rule for me. It's like the result of the arrangement not providing it itself, and which is pretty common in like rock music these days, where it's just like we always want to add more and make it thicker, and it just keeps getting thicker and thicker, and like so it's like big guitar, and now there's another big guitar, and they're both there. You know, it doesn't swap. So it's pretty common for me to be like, okay, that first guitar ducks, well, this new one becomes the focus on top of it, for example. Um, I'll often do like the kick and snare might duck on the verse, rather than just being like full and big there as well, so that the vocals kind of take over. Because often, there's like the riff and then the verse. So the vocals become like enter, and I want them to become the center channel focus really clearly. And then those drums can come back on the chorus, for example. So lots of lots of the macro adjustments for me, where it's like whole verse goes down for this, chorus goes up here, kind of thing. Big moves like that. I think maybe I would mention that it's rarely. I don't know if this is the same for you, Benny, but it's rarely like just 2 points on the automation line. It's like normally four, and there's a ramp in and out, or like down and up, depending on which way I'm boosting or cutting volume automation. But there's always like a gradual transition in and out of it for me.
Yeah, same here. It's almost always, yeah. Sometimes it works, but if you just go down a dB as soon as the part starts or something, but usually, and the more drastic the changes are, the more I find it necessary to make these gradual changes
Hmm.
and to build in these ramps. It's just, yeah, it's just distracting and weird if something's all of a sudden drops a lot
Yeah.
or increases a lot. So yeah, we totally have to do that, and you have to. Sometimes I make sure that the overall level sort of stays the same, so I will increase something by a couple of dB, and I will decrease something else the same way,
Right.
so the overall level kind of stays the same. Totally depends, but I think it's important for you to know that if you're not familiar with the whole concept of automation, that there are different ways you can do this. So you can grab a fader and just pull it down, and then how fast you pull it down or up, that's your gradual or not so gradual curve and your automation curve that you're writing. But you can also just make 2 points. That's what you just said, Malcolm. You can just make the automation line visible and then use your mouse and make 2 points and then just drag it down. And then you have um, this volume jump, or you can make it like a ramp, a gradual thing, or you can make it like a smooth curve
Hmm.
and curve with different shapes and like all these things. So, and the fader or the plugin or whatever you are automating will follow that line. That's what we talk about. So you write that on the track, and then whatever parameter you're automating will follow that line. And when you hit play, you can watch your fader move, or your gain knob, or your EQ um, band, or whatever, and
Yeah.
then that's what we're talking about here. But yeah, I think musical changes is the key here. You want to make it musical. You want to do it in a way that doesn't distract the listener.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so helping the arrangement. Sometimes I think that, as you said, some songs do it because the arrangement is already good, and I don't have to do anything. And sometimes I need to do very drastic. I need
Hmm.
to make very drastic changes. That totally depends on the song, but this stage is still about what I call the macro dynamics. This is still about like big picture stuff, making it work from part to part, making sure that when new stuff comes in, other stuff gets out of the way. Now, the next thing on our list here, uh, the next things basically, like writing parallel buses, effects,
Right.
um, enhancing the groove of the song, automating EQ moves, all the other stuff that we've written on our outline here. This is all not big picture stuff. This is detail work, and this is the most musical and artistic thing when it comes to automation. So I don't know what you do there, but I think it's safe to say that most people will ride a vocal fader or will ride the drum bus or maybe a kick drum or a bass or whatever, like individual tracks that change volume throughout the song. I think most people will also ride effects returns like reverbs, delays, stuff like that. That's not always the same volume throughout the song. But
Hmm.
then there's stuff that where I don't know if other people do that as well. And certainly didn't invent it, I guess, but everyone does it differently probably. I have some flavors or some like attitude buses and stuff that I like in certain parts, but not always. And I
Right.
rarely just turn them on and off, but I like ride them. I'll have my drum crush that I mentioned in another episode, or a vocal crush, like a parallel distortion bus that I use on something. And I might turn that fader up in a very energetic, aggressive part, but then when a more quiet bridge comes in or some ambient part that's just not aggressive, I will bring that down. And then on a breakdown, I'll turn it up full volume, or I don't know, like I'll just have these flavors, these attitude buses basically, and I'll ride them throughout the song. And it's almost like you make a drummer hit harder or softer in a certain part. And you can do the same thing with a vocalist. You can make him or her seem to get closer to the mic and further away and like scream a little harder. You can just enhance the natural dynamics and add some attitude and aggression to the whole thing.
I don't really do parallel crush stuff like
Okay.
that. And if I do, I guess this is a form of automation. Yeah, it totally is. If I do, I usually end up committing whatever that is, and then I actually just mute the chunks that I want, like right on the waveform. So, like example will be, uh, like an added width bass track where I've like just split the bass into high frequencies, added a widener and some distortion on it. And it's this weird sounding thing. I just commit the whole track and then mute out all of the chunks of that waveform that I don't want it to be. And then it comes in, and the volume's just where I kind of, and I guess I could automate the volume on that sometimes. Um, so just a different process for the same thing, I think, more or less. But for as far as like these small automation things that are adding flavor, tons of them, tons of them. So like I might add like a dynamic EQ that's adjusting the attack on the bass or the guitar just on the courses. So like they become heavier there, or transient designer kicks in, that kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's totally automation. I would like, yeah. I mean, automation sounds like a robot doing something automatically, so maybe it's not automation if you like commit stuff, but it's the same purpose. It's the same why behind you doing these things. So yeah, totally. I mean that's almost the same thing that I do. I just make a fader move and you commit things, and I sometimes do that as well. Bottom line is we make things sound different in different parts for similar
Yeah.
reasons.
Actually, you know what? I think last episode you mentioned that your delay throws are just a copy of a waveform with the plugin right on it,
Yep.
and I did that for the first time. Or not, I don't know if it was the first time, but I definitely did it because you mentioned it just on a mix last week, and it was like, this is awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. Cool. Glad it helped.
Yeah, no, that was great.
Yeah, cool. Totally. Yeah. Great point because that's also something you could do with automation, like whatever you prefer. You can, if you want to add a delay throw on a certain word or a certain part of a sentence, then you could automate you could have the send to the delay at 0, and whenever a word comes in that you want to send to that delay for the delay throw, you could just automate the send up and then down
Yep,
again. That's one way of doing it. You could have the send all the way up and automate the return up and down.
yep,
That's tricky though because then you might get the delay on the word before the actual delay throw and stuff. So I
it's hard.
yeah. So I prefer automating the send and not the return. Um, or you do what I do and you just duplicate the track, only move the words on the new track that are supposed to go to the delay, and then just put the delay send there, and that's it.
Yeah, which worked just like a charm. It was awesome. I think we should highlight that. Bands requesting delay throws in very specific ways. It is very time consuming. I want you to know how hard your mixer is working to make those delay throws happen. It's one of the most tedious things for sure. And especially with because vocalists always have like vocals are this one weird thing where you can be so ahead or so behind the beat and it still
Oh
sounds
God,
good.
yeah,
You know, it's like style with
yeah,
vocals
I
for
know
some
what.
reason we don't mind it. But
Yeah,
with delay throws, which are normally synced to a tempo, it becomes a nightmare to make your delay throws sound good if you have one of those styles where you're really ahead or behind.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, that's a nightmare. It sounds totally fine until you enable the delay throw, and then you have to edit the actual vocal or delay the delay or something like
Yeah,
that to
yeah,
make it work.
totally,
Like sometimes I have to throw a delay plugin, like just a sample delay in front of the delay or something like that,
yeah,
just to make that work, but not touch the vocal because it was fine the way it was, and like
totally.
weird things like that. Yeah, absolutely. And also, if people want a delay throw on a certain word or sometimes just a certain part of a word or so, and
Hmm.
then you make that happen and it sounds totally weird because the beginning of the word always sounds cut off no matter what you do because it's just part of the flow, and then when you isolate it and cut it out it just doesn't sound like a word anymore.
Yeah.
So that can happen. Sometimes you think something's a really good idea until you try and then you figure out it's not.
Yeah, you know, this is actually an unrelated but very good trick that I learned from recording a rapper. He insisted on recording his own delay throws, so he just did them verbally without a real plugin, and then I added reverb to make him sound more like a delay throw, and they were the best delay throws I've ever had.
Yeah, I mean,
I think just do your effects manually.
but why not? I mean, it's not so much work. Like
It's not
usually those things happen a couple of times throughout the song, if at all. Sometimes just once, and so why
totally
not just record totally? Or if you record multiple takes anyway, just grab like maybe from another take, grab it from another take, and like put those things in, or I don't know, whatever works. But
totally.
yeah, okay,
Yeah.
cool. The, I don't know. Do you do like the really granular like detail stuff, like a certain hit or a certain downbeat? Um, Or
Yeah,
like things like Andrew Sheps, like that's one thing I wanted to mention. Like I saw Andrew Sheps and a couple of other people ride the whole drum group, for example, with the groove of the song. So he would just
mm,
have the fader, and would with every kick drum he would turn it up and like
just pumping it.
yeah, and pumping it a little bit, which
I haven't
requires
done that
skill.
move. I don't think I've done that move, but I definitely do some like very detailed, mostly like I would say EQ stuff. Lots of little EQ stuff. Like maybe I'm taking off a little bit of high end, like a very gradual high shelf is cutting on the verses and then opening back up on the courses and stuff like that on individual buses. And this is, I feel like I spend way too much time on this stuff actually. Because I get the bulk of the mix done and then I spend 4 hours just doing these stupid tweaks. But like they all add up,
Yeah,
and they really make me happy. And it's also some of the funnest parts about mixing. So I'm kind of willing to spend the extra time doing it. But it's always a result of something I'm hearing. You know, so like just like okay, this is not this dynamic shift from the verse to the chorus is just not what it needs to be. What can we do to make that happen?
yeah,
Maybe it's like the compressor crushes a little bit harder on the drums for the chorus or something, and it just gets dirtier. There's unlimited uh, things to try really, and you'll just have to develop an instinct for how to make that happen. I think we should mention that pretty well every plugin, every parameter should be automatable. So whatever you can do with a plugin in static mode, you can do with automation and kind of tweak it gradually if you need to as well.
absolutely. Yeah, totally. You could. There's. I don't think there's any plugin these out there these days that is not automatable. Um,
There are plugins that, in at least in Pro Tools, that don't have the automations labeled. So you go to enable it, and it just comes up as like Control One, Control Two, and you're like, well, which one's which? And
oh
there's a
yeah,
way around
that's
that if you know some shortcuts. But
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's two things to unpack here that I want to talk about in what you just said. The first one is you said a compressor might react differently in different parts, or you make it react differently. That's an interesting conversation to have because I think there's two ways usually of automating things. You can automate it after the chain, or you can automate it into a chain, which leads to different
mm,
results. So, especially with drums, if you process the individual drums and then the drum bus, the drum group, and then you grab the drum bus fader and automate that, the sound will stay the same, except for the mix bus processing, and then you will just change the volume of the whole drum kit.
right.
It gets interesting though if you automate the input of that drum bus into the drum bus compressor, because that way, and same goes for vocals, because that way you might increase the volume, but it doesn't get as loud. It just gets a little more dense and
Yep.
energetic. And that's a cool thing sometimes. Same with vocals. Sometimes it's cool to automate into the compressor because you get a level change, but usually not as much because the compressor compensates for that, but you get an increased density and
Attitude.
energy and attitude and everything. And so it's just worth knowing that these are two completely different things and the results will be drastically different sometimes.
Yeah, I'm
um,
glad you said that because we kind of talked about clip gain almost as if it was only something you did at the beginning, but it's totally not. It's totally a sonic decision once your plug-in chains are in place and you've kind of
yeah,
fine-tuned your mix. Like once you're really close to a finished mix, you're going to go back to some clip gain for sure because it's like a different sonic than turning up the volume. And I think it often, especially with a vocal, clip gaining the vocal up into its plug-in chain often sounds more natural than turning up the volume of the whole thing. I guess it kind of depends what you're going for, but
I
it's
agree.
like more in the flavor of the mix.
Yeah, I agree. And because it's not only this, yeah, I think just the volume change in the in real life, I think nothing is just a volume change.
Yeah.
If you change the volume, the I don't know, the room sounds different. Your the hearing curve is like
Hmm.
different. Like everything changes with volume. The perceived energy and how close something is changes. So I think if you automate into a chain and it does not only the volume change but also the other things change with it, it's more musical. It's
Definitely.
hard to
Yeah.
explain, but it feels the same to me. Yeah. And then
The
the other
same.
thing. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. I just
Okay.
want.
Well, I
Yeah,
know that
go
a
ahead.
lot of our listeners are really into, sorry, I know that a lot of our listeners are really into trying to make guitar sims work for them because it's just such a convenient way to get guitars recorded. And clip gaining your performance into that amp sim is like an entirely different thing than turning up the volume after that amp sim plugin. That like your whole amp responds to how hard it's hit. So I use that clip gain into a guitar amp all the time. Like it's not like vocals where it's like kind of the same thing. It's just totally different.
It's like turning your volume knob on the guitar up and down. Like
Yeah, it's more of a tone thing than a volume thing. If you have a distorted amp sim going on, it probably won't get louder at all. Actually, it'll just get a totally different distortion vibe going on.
yeah, it's like a booster pedal or like
Yeah,
a clean booster pedal in front of an amp that you can turn up and down.
hmm,
That's basically it, and it will drastically change everything. Yeah,
definitely.
totally. Before I forget, the other thing that you mentioned before that I wanted to talk about a little bit is, I think you said that certain like all the detail work pays off, and it's like it seems like very tedious, time consuming things at the end of the process, but it really pays off. And I think we've often talked about the 80/20 rule and the
Hmm.
how a good balance, a good static balance, right panning, right levels, getting your EQ right, getting your basic like compression right and stuff, how that gets you like 80% of the way, which is true. And but I also think that these final 20 or maybe 10 or 5 or 2%, I don't know, can be the difference between a great sounding mix and a like a really amazing professional sounding sort of mix. Like
Yeah,
a lot of people who are not as experienced can make good sounding mixes these days, and that's the 80% that we always talk about, and that's cool. And um, yeah, it's an accomplishment. It's an accomplishment in and of itself if you can get there. But then the final details in the end, that's what really makes the difference between an amateur and a pro mix. Because with experience and with the like, if you're willing to put in that amount of I don't know, care and like this attention to detail into it, then you can really, I don't know, that this is something not a lot of hobbyists are willing to do or think is necessary. And I think if you listen to really, really, really great mixes, you hear things like a certain bass lick or sometimes a note or some
hmm,
cool thing happening on some track on some instrument suddenly get louder a little bit and then go down again, and just to feature that moment. Or
yeah,
like we would do stuff like that all the time, like especially with like bass lines. I love to do that. Sometimes there is a hidden gem in a bass recording in a bass track that just feels awesome, or a little lick that supports the vocal melody or whatever, and I would go in and like automate the tiny lick up, and sometimes with multiple points, like with a musical curve, and then down again. Or I would bring up a certain ghost note on the snare, but the next one not so much maybe, or I would make a fill roll a little more, and like I would do all these little moves, these tiny moves to make whatever is the voice in this part in this moment
yeah,
shine. Like there's always, I always think about like every part has, or every short moment even has a voice, has one really important thing that I want to feature. And I always listen for that. And I have to listen multiple times to a song because I can only focus on one thing. But whenever I discover something, and whenever I think that should be the voice in this moment, I'll feature it and I'll maybe turn something else down. So
mm,
I might listen to a song 5 times, and I might listen to the drums the first time, the bass the next time, the guitars the next time, and then the vocals. And every time I listen through the song, I'll listen for those things and feature them. And what I'll end up with is a mix that has all those little ear candy things and all those little features in it that otherwise would have gotten lost. And I know for a fact that this is also something that artists, that my mixing clients really love when I do that, because they feel like somebody put care into it and paid attention and featured what they came up with.
right,
And if you don't do it, you'll get revision like requests like,
yeah,
"Hey, there's this one bass lick in this part, and there's this one breath that we really find really
totally.
cool in the vocals or something. Can you turn that up, please?" So that's what you get if you ignore that.
You end up
So
doing
yeah,
it anyways.
yeah,
Yeah. But also, I was going to say that getting those notes is also a good thing in itself. It means that you got everything else right. Usually, if that's all there is in your notes, is just like the little, hey, we need this little lick louder. That shows that the band's like, oh, you've our vision's so close. You just need to know our personal insight into it. So hopefully you're at least there, but hopefully you're already getting it, and you've just like spotted them already preemptively. You're in tune with what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, as always, I think there's this balance here because you don't want to mess around with it forever, but you also want to put in the time necessary
Yeah,
to just get it right. And we all love these records where you put headphones on, and every time you listen to it, you discover something new, interesting, and exciting. Um, that's what automation can do at this point.
definitely. Do
So
you
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
do you automate your master bus or mix bus?
Yeah, I do. That's what I meant before when I that's the last thing I do, like the very last thing. After all the ear candy stuff, all the
Yeah.
details, all the individual buses and channels and the effects, like the very last thing before I finish the mix and send it to the client is when I will listen to the transitions from part to part, and I will make sure that everything hits just right. And sometimes, like often it does, but sometimes I don't want to change an individual thing and it just works, but maybe the chorus is a tiny bit too quiet, as I said, and
Mhm.
then I'll just bump it up half a dB or zero point 0.3 dB. Or maybe there's this breakdown and the first kick drum hit, no matter what I do on the individual channels, it's just not hard enough. And sometimes what I do is just build this little ramp on the first beat of this chorus
Yeah.
and just do it on the first hit, just make that a little harder, and that does the trick.
Totally.
Or I automate. Like, I very rarely do this, but sometimes I'll automate a widener on the mix bus where I would make the chorus a little wider and then narrower after the chorus again. But these tiny volume bumps, these are usually what I do,
Yeah.
and then not only increasing stuff, but sometimes I'll have to bring down a part just because it got too loud with all the bus compression going on and the mix bus
Hmm.
compression. Sometimes a very quiet part is not really quiet anymore. So you have this loud song, and then there's this break, and then an acoustic guitar is playing, for example, and that acoustic can get really loud compared, like it can be perceived really loud compared to the rest of the band, which is not really natural sounding. And then when that
Agreed.
happens, um, because there will be less compression because the drums are gone and all that. So when that happens, I'll have to either bring down that channel quite a bit, or sometimes in addition to that, I'll just bring down the mix bus in the quieter section and then let it go up again in the louder section to
Yeah.
compensate for the dense mix bus. This happens when I master and mix at the same time, and when I really make things loud. Then I need to compensate for that in order to not make it sound flat. So I don't want
Yeah.
everything to be the same loudness.
Totally. Totally. And sometimes you have to get really clever with how to get around that mix bus processing, because maybe you want it to all be hitting that same sound, like the sonic of it is nice. So you don't want to change how your mix bus is being hit. So you can automate like the output of your bus compressor, for example, and use that as your volume so that the same compression is happening. It all depends on what you want to hear, and you just have to kind of pinpoint that spot in the chain that you want to make the change at.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think this is the key to making loud mixes sometimes or loud masters, to work around that stuff. And yeah, that's just part of it. That's just how you have to do it. Um, yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. I think this is even more than I thought. Like we even mentioned more things than I thought we would because I know that automation is very important, but now after this episode, I realize that how much of it is actually automation and
Mm-hmm.
how yeah, how important it is for the whole mix, like how much of it wouldn't ever work if it wasn't for automation. And I
Yeah.
sometimes wonder, when I think back a couple of years when I started out, I didn't use any automation, and in the beginning, in the very beginning, or very little automation. I had to learn what it is, and all my first mixes were pretty static mixes, and I just wonder how that worked because I can't imagine that anymore, not at all.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that we're not doing that anymore. I was the same.
Yeah, yeah,
You're just too caught up on the other stuff, but yeah, like I get to the automation phase pretty quick these days, and I think that's an advantage of just experience is that it allows me to get to this stuff quick and still have fresh ears when I need them on this really micro adjustment stuff.
yeah.
Um, Now, I think what we could end this conversation with is talking about building automation into your recording, into your engineering, which removes a lot of these steps. Like we said, like the arrangement is so important. Like a good song that is arranged really well, pretty much automates itself, which is just fantastic. But uh, machine mixer that I'm just and an engineer and producer who I'm just obsessed with, one of the best I think. He I know that he's really into just grabbing guitar knobs from part to part as a recording. Be like, all right, more mid range on the chorus, less mid range on the verse, whatever it is, like just literally changing the sound of the amp as each part comes. And that's like building the automation into your song. It's like, okay, we've got more attack for this part. Doing it with drums I've done where we throw like a big dampener on for the verses and pull it off and punch in the choruses. Now like that the snare sound just pops in the chorus. That kind of stuff. You can pretty much anything that we did can be done on the way in if you work hard and are clever about it.
Yeah, and totally. I mean, you have to be willing to just do it over and over again until it's right, because you will
Mm,
mess it up when at first. But totally, um, you could like I would often have my fingers, my hand on the gain knob of a preamp while a person is singing, and I would
mm,
move the gain up and down depending on like if we're in a loud part or quiet part, if the vocalist is close to the mic or far from the mic, and I would increase the saturation and decrease it, and that takes experience, and you don't want to mess up the person's take, so maybe leave enough headroom that even if you mess it up, you can still correct afterwards if you really
right.
want to use the take. So maybe don't go to the extremes in the beginning when you don't know what you're doing. But I would often like automate mic pre-gains, compressor thresholds,
Yep.
or the input of a distressor, or the guitar, as you said, the gain knob on a guitar amp sometimes. Um, it's funny how we call that automation, or we say that's something like automation, because that's like manual work. It's not, nothing
Yeah.
is automated in this
Nothing's
case,
automated.
But like it helps to think of the whole concept like that. Something is not static but changing throughout the song.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's why w- this whole podcast has primarily been about engineering and not mixing, actually
Yeah.
intentionally not mixing. And we're finally introducing mixing. But the reason we're bringing it up is to help you become better engineers.
Yep.
So you're learning about our processes as mix engineers and hopefully going to reverse engineer that. Sorry. Hopefully going to reverse engineer that into your productions.
Totally. Totally. All right, this has been great. So I have two final questions that just came up. I have two final questions for you, Malcolm. First of all, do you ever mix entire albums, like entire records, in one session?
I do not. My computer would light on fire.
Okay, because I love to do that. I mean, my computer doesn't like that at all as well, but it can take it most of the time, so I will do that, and I love it. But this is turning sessions into an automation nightmare sometimes, or
Yeah,
like it looks like these. I don't know what the English word for this is. The like the underground maps
like a
or whatever you
subway or
yeah, the subway. I don't know what but you know what I mean when you look at all
yeah,
these colored lines that go in all sorts of directions. That's what my sessions look like
awesome.
when I do that. I was just curious because that brings up a whole new level of art of having to automate things from song to song. And
Yeah.
back in the day, I got started. I even mixed entire records without automation in one session, so the every
Oh
channel would be the same
wow.
throughout the whole record. I would just use clip gain,
That doesn't
and
even make
then
sense.
yeah, no, not at all. I don't know how I don't know how I did it, but and it definitely didn't work as well. But I just that's how I did it.
Yeah.
Um, so that was question number one. And then I forgot about question number two, so it was probably not as important. But I wanted to know another thing from you, just out of curiosity. Anyway, um, yeah, let's leave it with that. I think that has been plenty to think
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, that's a good overview of automation. We didn't mention it wasn't exhaustive at all. Like we said, there's like unlimited things you can do. Any parameter on any plugin and any controlling your DAW as well, the pan knobs. We didn't even really talk about panning things.
Oh yeah.
And that happens a lot too.
I mean,
So,
we talked about that in the panning episode not long
right.
ago.
Yeah, we
So
sure did.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. Oh, I remember my question.
All right.
I never asked you, or maybe I have and I don't remember, but do you like using an actual fader hardware controller for automations, or are you like
Hmm.
mouse only?
I am mouse only because I don't own a fader. Faders are actually great, I think. The studio that I interned at, the Woodshop recording studio, has like I think he's got like 16 or 12 channels faders. I can't remember now. He's got like a pretty big fader bay in front of him, and I really enjoyed that. Generally, I was only grabbing one fader at a time, honestly,
Yeah.
in the mixing phase. It's great while tracking, but in the mixing phase, it's just like, okay, grab the lead vocal and do a move. And I really did enjoy that. He also had this little handy button called back and play right above the fader. So if you screwed it up, you just click this and it just like jumps back 2 bars and you get to take another swing at it. So that was handy. Great for
Awesome.
learning how to do it by hand. I still do, though, often grab throw a track into touch automation mode and then grab the fader in the computer with my mouse. So I'm doing like
Yeah.
a fader move by holding the mouse and holding the fader with my mouse. And so I'll still do those moves, especially on like my reverbs and delay sends and stuff, wet stuff like that.
Absolutely. And I have to say, if you have a trackball, I think that works very well, better than with a mouse, at least for me, because a trackball acts similarly, for me at least, to a fader. Like I can just click the thing and then I can move the ball like a fader. And
Right.
it's better for me than having to move the whole mouse thing.
Yeah.
So
No, that seems great.
yeah, that works. And also, part of the reason why I asked was, if you are thinking about getting a controller now, folks, then I would say save yourself some money and just buy one fader. That was what I wanted to say. What you already
Mm,
said, Malcolm, because I tried everything. I tried 8 channels. I tried 16 channels. I tried. I wanted to have two faders, like 16 faders. I wanted to have two faders, but there's no controller out there
yeah.
really that just has two faders. And the reason is I thought it would be cool to have 16 faders and then I could grab all the faders and do it everything in real time. Doesn't work. Like our brains are not designed to do that. Like you can focus on one thing and you can move that one thing and pay attention to it and then you move on to the next thing. What these multiple faders are useful for is balancing, as we said in another episode. Like if you want to put things in context and you want to bring a certain group of tracks up and then balance it against another group of tracks, for that it's great, but I don't think it's worth spending so much money on these controllers just for that. Two faders would be awesome because you could balance two mics or two groups
Yeah.
against each
I,
other like that.
I would
That's
really like
pretty
that.
cool. Um, but if it's just for automation, if you're thinking about getting a controller just so you can ride faders, I would just get one. That's all you ever need. Like focus on one thing, ride it, and then focus on the other thing. And you can
Yeah.
also, if you want to ride multiple channels, you can always create a VCA in your software and have it control a bunch of faders and then ride that VCA. This is the same thing has been done on analog consoles all
Yeah.
the time. That if they have like automation and VCAs built into them, just because you just have to focus on moving that one thing and listening to the music.
Yeah. Much easier to recall as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right, there's that. I think that's it. I want to mention one more thing today, and that is if you go to the website, theselfrecordingband.com, there is a new button that says apply for a free coaching call. And what that does is you click it and you choose a slot, a day and a time, and you have to fill out a little form so that I know a little bit about your music and about your background and what you're trying to do. And I will like check out these answers, and if I think I can help you, and which is I hope so at least the case most of the time, if I'm sure I can help you, then I'll schedule a free coaching call with you, a full hour free coaching, one on one. We create a roadmap for you. We talk about what the things are that would help you most at the moment. I will listen to your songs. I will give you feedback. We will together improve your recordings immediately and come up with a plan for you, steps for you to follow next. And there's no strings attached. Like you don't have to do anything after that. You can just take what I give you and run with it, or you can take the next steps and work with me. Whatever you do, apply for that free coaching call. And let's talk about your music. Go to the selfrecordingband.com, not slash, just the selfrecordingband.com. And there's a big ass button. You can't miss it. It's all over the website. Hit it. It says apply for a free call. And I can't wait to hang and talk about your music.
Yes. Do it. This is a good idea.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook. I hope that worked. Thank you, Malcolm, for
Yeah.
hanging with me again. See you
Hey, my
next week.
pleasure. See you next week.